The flying carpet, the invisible cap, the gold-giving ring, and the smiting club, in a cottage near the high road and close to the shores of a large lake, there once lived a widow, poor and old. She was very, very poor, but her mother's heart was rich in pride in her son, who was the joy of her life. He was a handsome lad with an honest soul. He earned his living by fishing in the lake, and succeeded so well that neither he nor his mother were ever in want of their daily bread. Everyone called him the fisherman. One evening at dusk he went down to the lake to throw in his nets, and standing on the shore with a new bucket in his hand, waited to put into it whatever fish it might please God to send him. In about a quarter of an hour or so he drew in his nets and took out 2 bream. These he threw into the bucket, and humming a merry song turned to go home. At that moment a traveller, poorly clad, with hair and beard white as the wings of a dove, spoke to him, saying, "Have pity on a feeble old man, obliged to lean on his stick, hungry and ragged. I beg you, in heaven's name, to give me either money or bread. The sun will soon set, and I, who have eaten nothing today, shall have to pass the night fasting, with the bare earth for a bed. My good old friend, I am sorry I have nothing about me to give you, but you see the black smoke curling up in the distance? That is our cottage, where my old mother is waiting for me to bring her some fish to cook for our supper. Now take these 2 bream to her. Meanwhile I will return to the lake and throw in my nets again to see if I can catch something more. Thus, with God's help, we shall all 3 have enough for supper tonight and breakfast tomorrow morning." While speaking, the fisherman handed the fish to the old man, when, marvel of marvels, he melted into the rays of the setting sun and vanished, both he and the fish. The fisherman, much astonished, rubbed his eyes and looked about on all sides. For a moment he felt afraid, but when he had crossed himself, all terror left him, and he went to draw in his nets by the light of the moon. And what do you think he found in them? It was neither a pike nor a trout, but a small fish with eyes of diamonds, fins of rainbow colour, and golden scales that shone and flashed like lightning. When he had spread his nets on the beach, the fish began to talk to him in the language of men. "Do not kill me, young fisherman," it said, "but accept in exchange for my life this golden ring. Every time you put it on your finger, repeat these words, 'I conjure thee, O ring, who gold can give, in the name of the little fishling of gold, for the good of man that man may live, and the honour of heaven send. New or old, little or much, as may be my need, coins of the realm, let them fall like seed.'" After uttering each of these words, a shower of gold pieces will fall. The fisherman gladly accepted the ring, and freeing the miraculous fish from the net, he threw it back into the water. As it fell, it shone in the air like a shooting star, and then disappeared beneath the waves. On his way back, he said to himself, "My mother and I will go to bed hungry tonight without our fried fish, but tomorrow, when I have made the golden coins gleam in our humble cottage, all sorts of good things will find their way there, and we shall live like lords." But things turned out very differently, for the first thing he saw on opening the door was the table covered with a white cloth, and upon it a china soup tureen in which lay the 2 bream freshly cooked. "Where did you get those fish from, dear mother?" "I do not know myself," replied she, "for I have neither cleaned them nor cooked them. Our table spread itself, the fish placed themselves upon it, and although they have been there an hour, they do not get cold. Anyone might think they had just been taken off the fire. Come, let us eat them." The widow and her son sat down, said grace, and after eating as much as they wanted, went to bed. Next morning, at breakfast time, the fisherman made the sign of the cross, and then put on the gold ring, at the same time repeating the words the fish had taught him. I conjure thee, O ring, who gold can give, in the name of the little fishling of gold, for the good of man, that man may live, and the honour of heaven send, new or old, little or much, as may be my need, coins of the realm. Let them fall like seed. When he had ceased speaking, the room was filled with a blast of wind, followed by flashes of lightning. Then a hailstorm of gold pieces showered down and quite covered the table. The chink of the money aroused his mother, who sat up in bed perfectly amazed. What is the meaning of this, my son? Am I awake or dreaming, or is it the work of the evil one? Where did all that money come from? Fear not, mother. I wear a cross that charms away evil spirits. I have my work so that you shall never want, and I have your heart, where for me there will ever be love to sweeten the disappointments and troubles of life. This gold that you see will drive poverty far away and enable us to help others. Take these pieces, lock them up safely, and use them when in need. As for me, kiss me and wish me good luck on my journey. What? Is it possible that you want to leave me already? Why? And whither are you going? I want to go, mother mine, to see the great city. When there, I mean to enroll myself in the national army. Thus the fisherman turned. Soldier will become the defender of his king, for the glory of his country and his mother. Of a truth, my son, I have heard some talk about the king being in danger, and that our enemies are trying to take his crown from him. But why should you go? Stay at home rather, for alone and unnoticed among so many troops you will neither be able to help nor to hinder. You are right. One man alone is a small thing, but by adding one grain to another the measure overflows. If all those who are capable of bearing arms will help the king, there is no doubt that he will soon overcome his enemies. But a harmless fisherman like you, of what use can you be in a battle? The fisherman has doubtless a peaceable disposition, and he never boasts of his strength. But when the right moment comes, he knows how to handle a sword, and how to water the land with the enemy's blood. And the victorious king will, perhaps, reward me for my bravery by giving me some splendid castle, or a few acres of forest land, a suit of armour and a horse, or even the hand of his daughter in marriage. If you feel like this, answered she, go, and may God bless you. May he cover you, dear child, with his grace as with a buckler, so that neither guns nor sabres shall do you harm. May he take you under his protection, so that you may return safe and sound to be a comfort to me. And at the end of my days may I rejoice in your happiness and live near you as long as God in his wisdom shall allow. Then she gave him her blessing and kissed him tenderly, making the sign of the cross in the direction he was about to take. So he departed, and after a few days, March reached the capital, thinking within himself how he might help the king most effectually. The town was surrounded by a countless host who threatened to utterly destroy it unless the king would agree to pay a very large ransom. The people crowded into the square and stood before the palace gates, listening to the herald's proclamation. "Hear the king's will," said the herald. "Listen, all ye faithful subjects, to the words he speaks to you by my mouth. Here are our deadly enemies who have scattered our troops and have come to besiege the capital of our kingdom. If we do not send them, by daybreak tomorrow, 24 wagons, each drawn by 6 horses and loaded with gold, they threaten to take the town and destroy it by fire and sword, and to deliver our land to the soldiers. It is certain that we cannot hold out any longer, and our royal treasure house does not contain 1/2 the amount demanded." Therefore, through me our sovereign announces that whosoever among you shall succeed, either in defeating our foes or in providing the money needed for the ransom, him will he appoint his heir to the crown, and to him will he give his only daughter in marriage, a princess of marvelous beauty. Further, he shall receive half the kingdom in his own right." When the fisherman heard these words, he went to the king and said, "My sovereign and father, command that 24 wagons, each harnessed with 24 horses and provided with leathern bags, be brought into the courtyard. I will engage to fill them with gold, and that at once before your eyes." Then he left the palace, and standing in the middle of the large square, recited the words the fish had taught him. These were followed by rumblings of thunder and flashes of lightning, and then by a perfect hurricane which sent down masses and showers of gold. In a few minutes the square was covered with a layer of gold so thick that, after loading the 24 wagons and filling a large half of the royal treasure house, there was enough left to make handsome presents to all the king's officers and servants. Next day the enemy returned to their own country, laden with the heavy ransom they had demanded. The king sent for the fisherman, and inviting him to partake of hydromel wine and sweetmeats, said, "You have today been the means of saving our capital from a great calamity, and shall, therefore, receive the reward which you have earned. My only daughter, a princess of great beauty, shall be your wife, and I will give you the half of my kingdom for a wedding present. I also appoint you my heir to the throne. But tell me, to whom am I indebted? What kingdom or land belongs to you? How is it that by a mere movement of the hand you were able to supply my enemies with such a quantity of gold?" And the fisherman, simple-hearted and straightforward as a child, ignorant of the deceptions practiced in court, answered frankly, "Sire, I belong to no royal or princely family. I am a simple fisherman, and your loyal subject. I procure my gold by means of this magic ring, and at any time I can have as much as I want." Then he told how his good fortune had come to him. The king made no answer, but it hurt his royal dignity to think that he owed his safety to one of his own peasants, and that he had promised to make him his son-in-law. That evening, after a luxurious supper, the fisherman, having taken a little more wine than usual, ventured to ask the king to present him to his bride. The king whispered a few words in the ear of the chamberlain of the court, and then went out. The chamberlain took the fisherman to the top of the castle tower, and there said to him, "According to the customs of the court, you should, before being introduced to the princess, send her by my hands some valuable jewel as a wedding gift." "But I have nothing of value or beauty about me," replied he. "Unless you offer the princess this golden ring, to which I owe all my good fortune, the princess herself, and the safety of her father." The chamberlain took the ring, and opening the window of the tower, asked, "Fisherman, do you see the moon in the heavens?" "I do." "Very well. She shall be the witness of your betrothal. Now look down. Do you see that precipice and the deep river shining in its depths?" "I do." "Very well. It shall be your bridal couch." So saying, the chamberlain threw him into the deep abyss, shut the window, and ran to tell the king that there was no longer a suitor for the hand of his daughter. The fisherman, stunned by the force of his fall, reached the water quite senseless. When he came to himself and opened his eyes, he lay in a boat, which at that moment was leaving the mouth of the river and entering the open sea. The very old man, to whom he had given the bream, was guiding the vessel with an oar. "My good old man, is it you? How did you manage to save me?" asked the astonished fisherman. "I came to your assistance," replied the old man, "because he who shows pity to others deserves their help when in need of it. But take the oar and row to whatever place you wish." And having thus spoken, the mysterious old man disappeared. The fisherman crossed himself, and having looked round upon the royal palace sparkling with light, he sighed deeply, and chanting the hymn, "Under thy help, put out to sea." When the sun rose, he saw some nets in the boat, and throwing them into the water, caught some pike, which he sold in a town near the shore, and then continued his journey on foot. 2 or 3 months later, when crossing some open country, he heard cries for help, which came from a hill near the forest. There he saw 2 little demons pulling each other's hair. By the cut of their short waistcoats, by their tight pantaloons and 3-cornered hats, he knew that they were inhabitants of the netherworld, from which they must have escaped. He had no doubt about it, but being a good Christian, he was not afraid, and accosted them boldly, saying, "Why do you ill-treat each other in this way? What is the meaning of it?" It means that for many a long year we have both been working hard to entice a silly fellow down below. He was first tempted by the desire to learn something of sorcery, and he ended by becoming an accomplished scoundrel. After giving him time to commit a great many crimes and thus forfeit his soul, we handed him over to safekeeping. Now we want to divide his property between us. He has left 3 things, which by every right belong to us. The first is a wonderful carpet. Whoever sits down upon it and pronounces certain magic words will be carried off at once over forests and under clouds, never stopping until his destination is reached. The magic words are as follows. Carpet. That of thyself through space takes flight, O travel, thou airy car, both day and night, till my desired haven comes in sight. The second piece of property is that club lying on the grass. After uttering some magic words, the club will immediately begin to hit so vigorously that a whole army may be crushed to pieces or dispersed. The words run thus. Club, thou marvellous club, who knows how to strike and smite my foes by thine own strength and in God's name? O strike well home, and strike again. The third piece of property is a cap that renders its wearer invisible. Now, my good man, you see our difficulty. There are but 2 of us, and we are fighting to decide how these 3 lots may be divided into 2 equal parts. "I can help you," said the fisherman, "provided you will do as I tell you. Leave the 3 lots here, just as they are the carpet, the club, and the magic cap. I will roll a stone from the top of this hill to the bottom. Whoever catches it first shall have 2 lots for his share. What do you say?" "Agreed," cried the demons, racing after the stone that rolled and bounded on its way down. In the meantime, the fisherman hastily put on the cap, seized the club, and sitting down on the carpet, repeated the magic formula without forgetting a single word. He was already high up in the air when the demons returned, carrying the stone and calling out to him to come and reward the winner. "Come down and divide those things between us," they cried after him. The fisherman's only answer was the magic addressed to his club. This enchanted weapon then fell upon them and struck so hard that the country round echoed to the sound thereof. In the midst of screams and cries and clouds of dust, they escaped at last, and the club, of its own accord, came back and placed itself at the fisherman's orders. He, in spite of the rapid motion, sat comfortably on the carpet with the cap under his arm and the club in his hand. Thus they flew over forests, under clouds, and so high that seen from the earth they looked like a tiny white cloud. Within 2 or 3 days they stopped at the king's capital. The fisherman, with his cap on, descended into the middle of the courtyard. The whole place was in confusion and trouble, for the commander of the foreign army, encouraged by having so easily received such a large sum of money, had returned to the attack and again held the town in siege, declaring that he would destroy every house and slay all the inhabitants, not sparing even the king himself unless he agreed to give him his only daughter in marriage. The terrified citizens crowded to the palace and besought his majesty to do as they asked him, and so save them from such a fate. The king, standing on the balcony, addressed them thus: "Faithful and devoted people, listen to me. Nothing but a miracle can save us from this fearful calamity. Yet it has happened that the most powerful assailants have been forced to ask mercy of the most feeble. I will never consent to the marriage of my only daughter with my most hated and cruel foe. Within a few moments my guards will be ready for combat, and I myself will lead them against the enemy. If there be any among you who can win the victory, to him will I give my only daughter in marriage, the half of my kingdom for her dowry, and the heirship to the throne." When he had finished speaking, the fisherman ordered his club to fall on the foe, while the country round echoed and re-echoed to the blows by means of which it destroyed the besieging army. It was in vain that the brave commander shouted to his soldiers not to run away, for when he himself received 3 blows from the club, he was obliged to make off as fast as possible. When the club had destroyed or driven away into the desert all the troops, it came back to its master, he, still wearing the magic cap, and with his carpet folded up under his arm and his club in his hand, made his way to the king's apartment. In the palace shouts of joy had succeeded the cries of fear which had been heard but a short while ago. Everyone was happy, and everyone congratulated the king upon his victory, as sudden and complete as it was unexpected. But the monarch, turning to his warriors, addressed them thus: "Victory! Let us rather return thanks to God. He who has won for us the victory has but to present himself and receive the reward he so richly deserves. That is, my beautiful daughter in marriage, the half of my kingdom, and the right of succession to my throne. These are the gifts that await this victorious hero. Where is he?" They all stood silent and looked from one to the other. Then the fisherman, who had taken off his cap, appeared before the assembly and said, "Behold, it was I who destroyed your enemies, O king. This is the second time that I have been promised the hand of the princess in marriage, the half of the kingdom, and the right of succession to the throne." The king, struck dumb with amazement, looked inquiringly at his chamberlain. Then, recovering his presence of mind, he shook hands with the fisherman. "Your good health, my friend. By what happy fortune do you return safe and sound to my court? The chamberlain told me that through your own carelessness you had fallen out of the tower window. In truth, we mourned you as dead. I should not have fallen out of the window if I had not been thrown down by your chamberlain. There is the traitor. I only escaped death through God's help, and I have just come to the palace in my air car." The king made a pretense of being angry with the guilty chamberlain, and ordered his guards to take him away to the donjon cell. Then, with pretended friendship, he embraced the fisherman and led him to his own apartments. All the while he was thinking and thinking what he could do to get rid of him. The idea of having him, a mere peasant and one of his own subjects, for a son-in-law was most repugnant to him and hurt his kingly pride. At last he said, "The chamberlain will most certainly be punished for his crime. As for you, who have twice been my savior, you shall be my son-in-law. Now the customs observed at court demand that you should send your bride a wedding gift, a jewel, or some other trifle of value. When this has been observed, I promise to give my blessing on the marriage, and may you both be happy and live long. I have no jewel worthy of the princess's acceptance. I might have given her as much gold as she wished, but your chamberlain took my magic golden ring from me. Before insisting upon its return, something else might be done. I thoroughly appreciate the value of your marvelous flying carpet. Why should not we both sit on it and make an excursion to the Valley of Diamonds? There we can obtain stones of the finest water, such as no one in the world has ever possessed. Afterwards we will return here with your wedding present for my daughter." The king then opened the window, and the fisherman, spreading out his carpet, repeated the magic words. Thus they took flight into the air, and after travelling 1 or 2 hours, began to descend at their destination. It was a valley surrounded on all sides by rocks so steep and so difficult of access that, except by God's special grace, no mortal man imprisoned there could possibly escape. The ground was strewn with diamonds of the finest quality. The king and fisherman found it easy to make a large collection, picking and choosing, gathering and arranging them upon the carpet. When they had put together all there was room for, the king sat down, and pointing to a large diamond shining at a little distance, said to the fisherman, "There is yet a more splendid one by the stream yonder. Run, my son-in-law, and bring it here. It would be a pity to leave it." The man went for it, while the king, taking advantage of his absence to pronounce the magic words, seated himself on the carpet, which lifted itself up, and floating like an air car above the forest and under the clouds, descended by one of the palace windows. His joy knew no bounds, for he now found himself not only free from his enemies and rid of the embarrassing presence of the fisherman, but also the possessor of the richest and most beautiful collection of diamonds in the world. By his orders they were put away in the caves of the royal treasure house, and with them the magic ring and the flying carpet. Meantime, the fisherman had returned with the diamond, and had stood aghast to see the carpet vanishing away in the distance. Wounded at the ingratitude and indignant at the perversity of a prince for whom he had done so much, he burst into tears. And indeed he had good reason to weep, for he had but to look at the enormous height of the polished rocks to be convinced of the impossibility of climbing them. The vegetation, too, was so scanty that it could only provide him with food for a very short time. He saw but 2 courses open to him, either to die from starvation, or to be devoured by the monstrous serpents that crawled about in great numbers. Night was now coming on, and the poor fellow was obliged to plan some way of escaping the frightful reptiles which were leaving their hiding places. At last he climbed up a tree, the highest he could find, and there, with his magic cap on and his club in his hand, passed the night without even closing his eyes. Next morning, when the sun rose, the serpents went back to their holes, and the fisherman got down from his tree, feeling stiff with cold and very hungry. For some time he walked about the valley in search of food, turning over the diamonds now so useless to him. There he found a few worthless mushrooms, and with such poor food as berries and sorrel leaves and the water of the valley stream for drink, he lived for some days. One night, when he went to sleep, it happened that his cap came off and fell to the ground, whereupon all the reptiles of the place immediately gathered round him. Aroused by their hisses, he awoke to find himself surrounded on all sides and almost in reach of their stings. He immediately seized his club, and had scarcely begun to repeat the magic formula before the weapon set to work to destroy the snakes, while the rocks resounded right and left with the blows. It was as if the monsters were being covered with boiling water, and the noise they made was like that produced by a flock of birds overtaken by a storm. They roared and hissed and twisted themselves into 1,000 knots, gradually disappearing one by one. Then the club returned of its own accord to the fisherman's hands, while he returned thanks to God for having delivered him from such a horrible death. At that moment there appeared upon the top of a steep rock his friend, the old man. Overcome with joy at the sight of him, the fisherman called out, "Save me! Come to me, my divine protector." The old man spread out his arms towards him, and having blessed him, drew him up, saying, "Now you are free again. Hasten to save your king, his daughter, your bride, and their kingdom." After he had left you in the valley as food for serpents, he was punished for his great crimes by the return of the enemy, who again laid siege to the capital. This happened at the very moment when he was surrounded by his guests, and was boasting of his possession of the air car, the magic golden ring, and the rest of his evilly acquired riches. His foes had consulted Yaga, a wicked sorceress, she advised them, to obtain the help of Kosti the magician, who promised his aid in carrying off the princess. When he came, he fell in love with the beautiful maiden at first sight and determined to marry her himself. In order to bring this about, he threw the king, the courtiers, and all the inhabitants of the land into a heavy sleep. Then he bore off the princess to his own palace, where she has been shut up and ill-treated because she refuses to have anything to do with him. His castle is situated at the very end of the world, to the west. There is nothing to hinder you from taking possession of your carpet and ring. They are hidden in the king's treasure house. Then go with your cap and club and conquer Kosti, rescue the princess, and deliver the king and his subjects." The fisherman would have thrown himself at the old man's feet to pour out his gratitude, but he suddenly vanished. So he thanked God for all his mercies, put on his invisible cap, and taking his club, made his way towards the capital. At the end of 3 days he entered the royal city. All the inhabitants were sleeping, the enchanted sleep from which they were powerless to rouse themselves. The fisherman went straight to the royal treasure house, took the magic ring and carpet. Then, seating himself upon the latter and repeating the magic words, away he went like a bird, over rustling forests and under clouds floating across the blue sky. After some days of travel, he alighted in Kosti's courtyard. Without a moment's delay, he folded up his carpet, put the magic cap on his head, and with club in hand entered Kosti's room. There, to his astonishment, stood the magician himself, admiring the wondrous beauty of the princess, for she was perfectly beautiful. I had never seen nor ear heard of such loveliness. With a low bow full of pride and an ironical smile, he was saying to her, "Beauteous princess, you have sworn a most solemn oath to marry none but that man who can solve your 6 riddles. It is in vain that I strive to guess them. Now there are only 2 courses open to you, either to release yourself from your vow, putting the riddles aside and consenting to be my wife, or to persist in your vow and thus deliver yourself up to my anger, which you will bitterly regret. I give you 3 minutes to decide." Upon hearing these threats, the fisherman trembled with rage, and in a low voice whispered the magic words to his club. This good weapon did not wait for the order to be repeated, but with one bound came down full upon Kosti's forehead. Stunned for a moment by the violence of the blow, the terrible creature rolled upon the ground. Sparks like fireworks sprang from his eyes, and the noise as of 100 mills seemed to go through his head. Any ordinary mortal would never have opened his eyes again, but Kosti was immortal. Getting on his feet, he pulled himself together and tried to find out who had thus attacked him. Then the club began to hit him again, and the sound thereof was like unto blows on an empty vault. It seemed to the magician as if showers of boiling water were being poured upon him. He twisted himself about in awful convulsions, and would have liked to bury himself in his palace walls and be turned to stone. At last, crippled with wounds, he began to hiss like a serpent, and springing forwards breathed upon the princess, filling the air with the poisonous blast. The maiden tottered and fell, as if dead. Kosti changed himself into a wreath of smoke, and floating out of the window, disappeared in a hurricane. The fisherman, still invisible, carried the princess into the courtyard of the castle. hoping that the fresh air might restore her to consciousness. He laid her upon the grass, his heart throbbing with hope and fear, and waited anxiously. Suddenly a raven and his nestlings, attracted by the sight of a dead body, and not being able to see the fisherman, came by croaking. The parent bird said to his young ones, "Come, children, sharpen claws and beak, crack, crack, for here's a feast not far to seek. Crack, crack, this young girl's course so white and sleek. Crack, crack." One small bird at once settled down on the princess, but the fisherman seized it and took off his cap so that he could be seen. "Fisherman," said the father raven, "let go, my dear birdling, and I will give you anything you want. Then bring me some of the life-giving water." The raven flew away and returned in about an hour, carrying in his beak a tiny bottle of the water. Then he again begged to have his nestling back. "You shall have it as soon as I have proved that the water is of the right sort." So saying, he sprinkled the pale face of the princess. She sighed, opened her eyes, and blushing at the sight of a stranger, got up and said, "Where am I? Why, how soundly I have slept!" "Lovely princess, your sleep might have lasted forever." Then he told her his story, how he had been thrown into the river, abandoned in the Valley of Diamonds, and so on, relating at full length all the marvelous events that had taken place. She listened attentively, then, thanking him for all he had done for her, placed her hand in his and said, "In the garden behind the palace is an apple tree that bears golden fruit. A guzla that plays of its own accord hangs on its branches, and is guarded day and night by 4 Negroes. Now the music from this guzla has the wonderful power of restoring health to invalids who listen to it, and happiness to those who are sad. That which is ugly becomes beautiful, and charms and enchantments of all kinds are broken and destroyed forever." The fisherman put on his invisible cap and went into the garden in search of the Negroes. Before going up to them, he addressed the magic words to his golden ring, and after a short thunderstorm, a shower of gold covered the ground. The Negroes, greedy of wealth, threw themselves upon it, snatching from each other handfuls of the golden rain. While thus engaged, the fisherman unhooked the guzla from the branches and hurried off into the courtyard with it. There he unfolded his carpet, and sitting down upon it with the princess at his side, flew high up into the air. He had not forgotten to bring with him the cap, the club, and the ring. The princess took care of the guzla. They floated across the blue sky, above the rustling forests and under the clouds, and in a few days arrived at the palace. There they descended, but the people still lay wrapped in the enchanted sleep, from which they seemed to have no power of awakening. The silence of the tomb reigned around. Some of the officers were sitting, others standing, all motionless and rigid, and each one in the position he occupied when last awake. The king held a goblet filled with wine, for he had been giving a toast. The chamberlain had his throat half filled with a lying tale, which there had been no time to finish. One had the end of a joke upon his lips, another a dainty morsel between his teeth, or a tale ready cooked upon his tongue. And it was the same in all the villages, throughout the length and breadth of the land. All the inhabitants lay under the enchanted spell. The labourer held his whip in the air, for he had been about to strike his oxen. The harvesters with their sickles had stopped short in their work. The shepherds slept by their sheep in the middle of the road. The huntsman stood with the powder still alight on the pan of his gun. The birds, arrested in their flight, hung in mid-air. The animals in the woods were motionless. The water in the streams was still. Even the wind slept. Everywhere men had been overtaken in their occupations or amusements. It was a soundless land, without voice or movement, on all sides, calm, death, sleep. The fisherman stood with the princess at his side in the banqueting hall where slept the king and his guests. Taking the magic guzla from the maid, he pronounced these words, "O guzla, play, and let thy sweetest harmonies resound through hall and cot, o'er hill and dale, and all the country round, that by the power and beauty of thy heavenly tones and song awakened may these sleepers be who sleep too well, too long." When the first tones of music burst forth, everything began to move and live again. The king finished proposing his toast. The chamberlain ended his tale. The guests continued to feast and enjoy themselves. The servants waited at their posts. In short, everything went on just as before, and as if nothing had happened to interrupt it. And it was just the same in all the country round. Everything suddenly awoke to life. The labourer finished ploughing his furrow. The haymakers built up the hay in ricks. The reapers cut down the golden grain. The hunter's gun went off and shot the duck. The trees rustled. The gardener went on with his work and his song. The rich, who thought only of enjoyment, entertained one another in luxury and splendour. Now when the king caught sight of his daughter leaning on the fisherman's arm, he could hardly believe his own eyes, and it made him very angry. But the princess ran to him, and throwing herself in his arms, related all that he had accomplished. The monarch's heart was softened, and he felt ashamed. With tears in his eyes, he drew the fisherman towards him, and before the assembled company thanked him for having the third time saved his life. "God has punished me for my ill treatment of you," said he. "Yet he is generous and forgives. I will fulfill all your wishes." He then added that the wedding feast should be held that very day, and that his only daughter would be married to the fisherman. The princess was filled with gladness, and standing with her father's arms round her said, "I cannot, however, break my word. When in Kosti's palace I made a vow to bestow my hand only on that man who should guess the 6 riddles I put to him. I am sure the heroic man, who has done so much, will not refuse to submit to this last trial for my sake." To this the fisherman bowed a willing assent. The first riddle was, "Without legs it walks, without arms it strikes, without life it moves continually." "A clock," he answered promptly, and to the great satisfaction of the princess, to whom this good beginning seemed to presage a happy ending. The second riddle ran thus, "Without being either bird, reptile, insect, or any animal whatsoever, it ensures the safety of the whole house." "A boat," said her lover. "Good. Now this is the third. Who is that pedestrian who walks fully armed, seasons dishes, and in his sides has 2 darts? He swims across the water without the help of a boatman." "A lobster." The princess clapped her hands and begged him to guess the fourth. "It runs, it moves along on 2 sides, it has but 1 eye, an overcoat of polished steel, and a tail of thread." "A needle." "Well guessed. Now listen to the 5th. It walks without feet, beckons without hands, and moves without a body. It must be a shadow." "Exactly," said she, well pleased. "Now you have succeeded so well with these 5, you will soon guess the 6th. It has 4 feet, but is not an animal. It is provided with feathers and down, but is no bird. It has a body and gives warmth, but is not alive." "It is certainly a bed," exclaimed the fisherman. The princess gave him her hand. They both knelt at the king's feet and received his fatherly blessing, after which he, with a large wedding party, accompanied them to the church. At the same time, messengers were sent to bring the fisherman's mother to the palace. The marvellous guzla played the sweetest music at the marriage feast, while the old king ate and drank and enjoyed himself and danced like a madman. He treated his guests with so much kindness and generosity that to this very hour the happiness of those who were present is a thing to be talked about and envied. Now you see what it is to love virtue and pursue it with energy and courage. For by so doing, a mere peasant, a poor, simple fisherman, married the most lovely and enchanting princess in the whole world. He received, besides, half the kingdom on his wedding day, and the right of succession to the throne after the old king's death. The broad man, the tall man, and the man with eyes of flame. It was in those days when cats wore shoes, when frogs croaked in grandmother's chairs, when donkeys clanked their spurs on the pavements like brave knights, and when hares chased dogs. So you see, it must have been a very, very long time ago. In those days, the king of a certain country had a daughter, who was not only exceedingly beautiful, but also remarkably clever. Many kings and princes travelled from far distant lands, each one with the hope of making her his wife, but she would have nothing to do with any one of them. Finally, it was proclaimed that she would marry that man who for 3 successive nights should keep such strict watch upon her that she could not escape unnoticed. Those who failed were to have their heads cut off. The news of this offer was noised about in all parts of the world. A great many kings and princes hastened to make the trial, taking their turn and keeping watch. But each one lost his life in the attempt, for they could not prevent, indeed they were not even able to see, the princess take her flight. Now it happened that Matthias, prince of a royal city, heard of what was going on, and resolved to watch through the 3 nights. He was young, handsome as a deer, and brave as a falcon. His father did all he could to turn him from his purpose. He used entreaties, prayers, threats. In fact, he forbade him to go. But in vain, nothing could prevent him. What could the poor father do? Worn out with contention, he was at last obliged to consent. Matthias filled his purse with gold, girded a well-tried sword to his side, and quite alone started off to seek the fortune of the brave. Walking along next day, he met a man who seemed hardly able to drag one leg after the other. "Whither are you going?" asked Matthias. "I am travelling all over the world in search of happiness." "What is your profession?" "I have no profession, but I can do what no one else can. I am called Broad, because I have the power of swelling myself out to such a size that there is room for a whole regiment of soldiers inside me." So saying, he puffed himself out till he formed a barricade from one side of the road to the other. "Bravo!" cried Matthias, delighted at this proof of his capacities. "By the way, would you mind coming with me? I, too, am travelling across the world in search of happiness." "If there is nothing bad in it, I am quite willing," answered Broad. And they continued their journey together. A little further on, they met a very slender man, frightfully thin, and tall and straight as a portico. "Whither are you going?" "Good man," asked Matthias, filled with curiosity at his strange appearance. "I am travelling about the world." "To what profession do you belong?" "To no profession, but I know something everyone else is ignorant of. I am called Tall, and with good reason, for without leaving the earth, I can stretch out and reach up to the clouds. When I walk, I clear a mile at each step." Without more ado, he lengthened himself out until his head was lost in the clouds, while he really cleared a mile at each step. "I like that, my fine fellow," said Matthias. "Come, would you not like to travel with us?" "Why not?" replied he. "I'll come." So they proceeded on their way together. While passing through a forest, they saw a man placing trunks of trees one upon another. "What are you trying to do there?" asked Matthias, addressing him. "I have eyes of flame," said he, "and I am building a pile here." So saying, he fixed his flaming eyes upon the wood, and the whole was instantly set alight. "You are a very clever and powerful man," said Matthias. "Would you like to join our party?" "All right, I am willing." So the 4 travelled along together. Matthias was overjoyed to have met with such gifted companions and paid their expenses generously, without complaining of the enormous sum of money he had to spend on the amount of food Broad consumed. After some days they reached the princess's palace. Matthias had told them the object of his journey and had promised each a large reward if he was successful. They gave him their word to work with a will at the task which everyone up till then had failed to accomplish. The prince bought them each a handsome suit of clothes, and when they were all presentable, sent them to tell the king, the princess's father, that he had come with his attendants to watch 3 nights in the lady's boudoir. But he took very good care not to say who he was, nor whence he had come. The king received them kindly, and after hearing their request said, "Reflect well before engaging yourselves in this, for if the princess should escape you, will have to die." "We very much doubt her escaping from us," they replied, "but come what will, we intend to make the attempt and to begin at once." "My duty was to warn you," replied the monarch, smiling, "but if you still persist in your resolution, I myself will take you to the lady's apartments." Matthias was dazzled at the loveliness of the royal maiden, while she, on her side, received the brilliant and handsome young man most graciously, not trying to hide how much she liked his good looks and gentle manner. Hardly had the king retired when Broad lay down across the threshold. Toil and the man with eyes of flame placed themselves near the window, while Matthias talked with the princess and watched her every movement attentively. Suddenly she ceased to speak, then after a few moments said, "I feel as if a shower of poppies were falling on my eyelids," and she lay down on the couch, pretending to sleep. Matthias did not breathe a word. Seeing her asleep, he sat down at a table near the sofa, leaned his elbows upon it, and rested his chin in the hollow of his hands. Gradually he felt drowsy, and his eyes closed, as did those of his companions. Now, this was the moment the princess was waiting for. Quickly changing herself into a dove, she flew towards the window. If it had not happened that one of her wings touched Toil's hair, he would not have awakened, and he would certainly never have succeeded in catching her if it had not been for the man with eyes of flame, for he, as soon as he knew which direction she had taken, sent such a glance after her, that is, a flame of fire, that in the twinkling of an eye her wings were burnt, and having been thus stopped, she was obliged to perch on the top of a tree. From thence Toil reached her easily and placed her in Matthias's hands, where she became a princess again. Matthias had hardly awakened out of his sleep next morning, and the morning after, the king was greatly astonished to find his daughter sitting by the prince's side. But he was obliged to keep silent and accept facts as they were, at the same time entertaining his guests royally. At the approach of the 3rd night he spoke with his daughter, and begged her to practice all the magic of which she was capable, and to act in such a way as to free him from the presence of intruders of whom he knew neither the rank nor the fortune. As for Matthias, he used every means in his power to bring about a happy ending to such a hitherto successful undertaking. Before entering the princess's apartments, he took his comrades aside and said, "There is but one more stroke of luck, dear friends, and then we have succeeded. If we fail, do not forget that our 4 heads will roll on the scaffold." "Come along," replied the 3. "Never fear, we shall be able to keep good watch." When they came into the princess's room, they hastened to take up their positions, and Matthias sat down facing the lady. He would have much preferred to remain with her without being obliged to keep watch all the time for fear of losing her forever. Resolving not to sleep this time, he said to himself, "Now I will keep watch upon you, but when you are my wife, I will rest." At midnight, when sleep was beginning to overpower her watchers, the princess kept silence, and, stretching herself on the couch, shut her beautiful eyes as if she were really asleep. Matthias, his elbows on the table, his chin in the palms of his hand, his eyes fixed upon her, admired her silently. But as sleep closes even the eyes of the eagle, so it shut those of the prince and his companions. The princess, who all this time had been watching them narrowly and only waiting for this moment, got up from her seat and, changing herself into a little fly, flew out of the window. Once free, she again changed herself into a fish, and falling into the palace, plunged and hid herself in the depths of the water. She would certainly have made her escape if, as a fly, she had not just touched the tip of the nose of the man with eyes of flame. He sneezed and opened his eyes in time to notice the direction in which she had disappeared. Without losing an instant, he gave the alarm, and all four ran into the courtyard. The well was very deep, but that did not matter. Tall soon stretched himself to the required depth and searched in all the corners, but he was unable to find the little fish, and it seemed impossible that it could ever have been there. "Now then, get out of that. I will take your place," said Broad. And getting in at the top by the rim, he filled up all the inside of the well, stopping it so completely with his huge body that the water sprang out, but nothing was seen of the little fish. "Now it is my turn," said the man with eyes of flame. "I warrant I'll dislodge this clever magician." When Broad had cleared the well of his enormous person, the water returned to its place, but it soon began to boil from the heat of the eyes of flame. It boiled and boiled till it boiled over the rim. Then, as it went on boiling and rising ever higher and higher, a little fish was seen to throw itself out on the grass, half-cooked. As it touched the ground, it again took the form of the princess. Matthias went to her and kissed her tenderly. "You have conquered, my master and husband," she said. "You have succeeded in preventing my escape. Henceforth I am yours, both by right of conquest and of my own free will." The young man's courtesy, strength, and gentleness, as well as his beauty, were very pleasing to the princess, but her father, the king, was not so ready to approve of her choice, and he resolved not to let her go with them. But this did not trouble Matthias, who determined to carry her off, aided by his 3 comrades. They soon all left the palace. The king was furious and ordered his guards to follow them and bring them back under pain of death. Meanwhile, Matthias, the princess, and the 3 comrades had already travelled a distance of some miles. When she heard the steps of the pursuers, she begged the man with eyes of flame to see who they were. Having turned to look, he told her that a large army of men on horseback were advancing at a gallop. "They are my father's guards," said she. "We shall have some difficulty in escaping them." Then, seeing the horsemen draw nearer, she took the veil from her face, and throwing it behind her in the direction of the wind, said, "I command as many trees to spring up as there are threads in this veil." Instantly, in the twinkling of an eye, a high, thick forest rose up between them. Before the soldiers had time to clear for themselves a pathway through this dense mass, Matthias and his party had been able to get far ahead, and even to take a little rest. "Look," said the princess, "and see if they are still coming after us." The man with eyes of flame looked back and replied that the king's guards were out of the forest and coming towards them with all speed. "They will not be able to reach us," cried she, and she let fall a tear from her eyes, saying as she did so, "Tear, become a river." At the same moment, a wide river flowed between them and their pursuers, and before the latter had found means of crossing it, Matthias and his party were far on in front. "Man with eyes of flame," said the princess, "look behind and tell me how closely we are followed." "They are quite near to us again," he replied, They are almost upon our heels." "Darkness, cover them," said she. At these words, Thor drew himself up. He stretched and stretched and stretched until he reached the clouds, and there, with his hat, he half covered the face of the sun. The side towards the soldiers was black as night, while Matthias and his party, lit up by the shining half, went a good way without hindrance. When they had travelled some distance, Thor uncovered the sun, and soon joined his companions by taking a mile at each step. They were already in sight of Matthias's home, when they noticed that the royal guards were again following them closely. "Now it is my turn," said Broad. "Go on your way in safety. I will remain here." "I shall be ready for them." He quietly awaited their arrival, standing motionless, with his large mouth open from ear to ear. The royal army, who were determined not to turn back without having taken the princess, advanced towards the town at a gallop. They had decided among themselves that if it resisted, they would lay siege to it. Mistaking Broad's open mouth for one of the city gates, they all dashed through and disappeared. Broad closed his mouth, and having swallowed them, ran to rejoin his comrades in the palace of Matthias's father. He felt somewhat disturbed, with a whole army inside him, and the earth groaned and trembled beneath him as he ran. He could hear the shouts of the people assembled round Matthias as they rejoiced at his safe return. "Ah, here you are at last, Brother Broad," cried Matthias directly he caught sight of him. "But what have you done with the army? Where have you left it?" "The army is here, quite safe," answered he, patting his enormous person. "I shall be very pleased to return them as they are, for the morsel is not very easy to digest." "Come then, let them out of their prison," said Matthias, enjoying the joke, and at the same time calling all the inhabitants to assist at the entertainment. Broad, who looked upon it as a common occurrence, stood in the middle of the palace square, and putting his hands to his sides began to cough. Then it was really a sight worth seeing at each cough. Horsemen and horses fell out of his mouth, one over the other, plunging, hopping, jumping, trying who could get out of the way the quickest. The last one had a little difficulty in getting free, for he somehow got into one of Broad's nostrils and was unable to move. It was only by giving a good sneeze that Broad could release him, the last of the royal cavaliers, and he lost no time in following his companions at the top of his speed. A few days later, a splendid feast was given at the wedding of Prince Matthias and the princess. The king, her father, was also present. Thor had been sent to invite him. Owing to his knowledge of the road and the length of his limbs, he accomplished the journey so quickly that he was there before the royal horsemen had time to get back. It was well for them that it was so, for had he not pleaded that their lives might be saved, their heads would certainly have been cut off for returning empty-handed. Everything was now arranged to everybody's satisfaction. The princess's father was delighted to know that his daughter was married to a rich and noble prince, and Matthias generously rewarded his brave travelling companions, who remained with him to the end of their days. The History of Prince Sluggerbill, or the Invisible. Night. There was once a king who had an only son, called Prince Sluggerbill. Now this young prince loved nothing better than travelling. So fond of it was he, that when he was 20 years old, he gave his father no rest until he allowed him to go on a long journey, in short, to travel all over the world. Thus he hoped to see many beautiful and strange things, to meet with marvellous adventures, to gain happiness, knowledge, and wisdom, and to return a better man in every way than when he left. Fearing his youth and want of experience might lead him astray, his father sent with him a valued and faithful servant. When all was ready, Slugobr bade the king adieu and set off to visit the land of his dreams. As he was jogging along, allowing his horse to go at its own pace, he saw a beautiful white swan pursued by an eagle about to pounce down upon it. Seizing his crossbow, he took such good aim that the eagle fell dead at his feet. The rescued swan stopped in its flight, and turning round said to him, "Valiant Prince Slugobul, it is not a mere swan who thanks you for your most timely help, but the daughter of the invisible knight, who, to escape the pursuit of the giant Koste, has changed herself into a swan. My father will gladly be of service to you in return for this kindness to me. When in need of his help, you only have to say 3 times, 'Invisible knight, come to me.'" Having thus spoken, the swan flew away. The prince looked after her for a long time, and then continued his journey. He travelled on and on and on, over high mountains, through dark forests, across barren deserts, and so to the middle of a vast plain where every green thing had been burnt up by the rays of the sun. Not a single tree, not even a bush or a plant of any kind was to be seen. No bird was heard to sing, no insect to hum, no breath of air to stir the stillness of this land of desolation. Having ridden for some hours, the prince began to suffer terribly from thirst, so, sending his servant in one direction, he himself went in another, in search of some well or spring. They soon found a well full of cool, fresh water, but unluckily without either rope or bucket to draw it up. After a few moments' thought, the prince said to his servant, "Take the leathern strap used for tethering our horses, put it round your body, and I will then let you down into the well. I cannot endure this thirst any longer." "Your Highness," answered the servant, "I am heavier than you, and you are not as strong as I, so you will not be able to pull me out of the water. If you, therefore, will go down first, I shall be able to pull you up when you have quenched your thirst." The prince took his advice, and fastening an end of the strap under his arms, was lowered into the well. When he had enjoyed a deep draught of the clear water, and filled a bottle of the same for his servant, he gave the signal that he wished to be pulled up. But instead of obeying, the servant said, "Listen, prince. From the day you were born up to the present moment, you have never known anything but luxury, pleasure, and happiness, while I have suffered poverty and slaved all my life. Now we will change places, and you shall be my servant. If you refuse, you had better make your peace with God, for I shall drown you." "Stop, faithful servant," cried the prince. "You will not be so wicked as to do that. What good will it do you? You will never be so happy as you have been with me, and you know what dreadful tortures are in store for murderers in the other world. Their hands are plunged into boiling pitch, their shoulders bruised with blows from red-hot iron clubs, and their necks sawn with wooden saws." "You may cut and saw me as much as you like in the other world," said the servant, "but I shall drown you in this." And he began to let the strap slide through his fingers. "Very well," said the prince, "I agree to accept your terms. You shall be the prince, and I will be your servant. I give you my word." "I have no faith in words that are carried away by the first wind that blows. Swear to confirm your promise in writing." "I swear." The servant then let down paper and pencil and dictated the following: "I hereby declare that I renounce my name and rights in favor of the bearer of this writing, and that I acknowledge him to be my prince, and that I am his servant. Written in the well. Signed, Prince Slug Bile." The man, having taken this document, which he was quite unable to read, drew out the prince, took off the clothes in which he was dressed, and made him wear those he himself had just taken off. Thus disguised, they travelled for a week, and arriving at a large city, went straight to the king's palace. There the false prince dismissed his pretended servant to the stables, and presenting himself before the king, addressed him thus in a very haughty manner. "King, I am come to demand the hand of your wise and beautiful daughter, whose fame has reached my father's court. In exchange I offer our alliance, and in case of refusal, war." "Prayers and threats are equally out of place," answered the king. "Nevertheless, prince, as proof of the esteem in which I hold the king, your father, I grant your request. But only on one condition, that you deliver us from a large army that now besets our town. Do this, and my daughter shall be yours." "Certainly," said the impostor. "I can soon get rid of them. However near they may be, I undertake by tomorrow morning to have freed the land entirely of them." In the evening he went to the stables, and calling his pretended servant, saluted him respectfully and said, "Listen, my dear friend. I want you to go immediately outside the town and destroy the besieging army that surrounds it. But do it in such a way that everyone will believe that I have done it. In exchange for this favor, I promise to return the writing in which you renounced your title of prince and engaged to serve me." The prince put on his armor, mounted his horse, and rode outside the city gates. There he stopped and called 3 times to the invisible knight. "Behold me, prince, at your service," said a voice close to him. "I will do anything you wish, for you saved my only daughter from the hands of the giant Kosti. I shall always be grateful." Slugobel showed him the army he had to destroy before morning, and the invisible knight whistled and sang, "Magu, horse with golden mane, I want your help yet once again. Walk not the earth, but fly through space, as lightning's flash or thunder's race. Swift as the arrow from the bow, come quick, yet so that none can know." At that instant, a magnificent grey horse appeared out of a whirlwind of smoke, and from his head there hung a golden mane. Swift as the wind was he. Flames of fire blazed forth from his nostrils. Lightnings flashed from his eyes, and volumes of smoke came from his ears. The invisible knight leapt upon his back, saying to the prince, "Take my sword and destroy the left wing of the army, while I attack the right wing and the center." The 2 heroes rushed forward and attacked the invaders with such fury that on all sides men fell like chopped wood or dried grass. A frightful massacre followed, but it was in vain that the enemy fled, for the 2 knights seemed to be everywhere. Within a short time, only the dead and dying remained on the battlefield, and the 2 conquerors quietly returned to the town. On reaching the palace steps, the invisible knight melted into the morning mist, and the serving-man prince returned to the stables. That same night it happened that the king's daughter, not being able to sleep, had remained on her balcony and seen and heard all that had taken place. She had overheard the conversation between the impostor and the real prince, had seen the latter call to his assistance the invisible knight, and then doff his royal armor in favor of the false prince. She had seen and understood everything, but she determined to keep silence for a little longer. But when on the next day the king, her father, celebrated the victory of the false prince with great rejoicings, loaded him with honors and presents, and calling his daughter expressed a wish that she should marry him, the princess could be silent no longer. She walked up to the real prince, who was waiting at table with the other servants, took his arm, and leading him to the king, said, "Father, and all good people, this is the man who has saved our country from the enemy, and whom God has destined to be my husband. He to whom you pay these honors is but a vile impostor, who has robbed his master of name and rights. Last night I witnessed such deeds as eye has never seen nor ear heard, but which shall be told afterwards. Bid this traitor show the writing which proves the truth of what I say." When the false prince had delivered up the paper signed by the serving man prince, it was found to contain the following words: "The bearer of this document, the false and wicked servant of the serving man prince, shall receive the punishment his sin deserves. Signed, Prince Sluggobill." "What? Is that the real meaning of that writing?" asked the traitor, who could not read. "Most assuredly," was the reply. Then he threw himself at the king's feet and begged for mercy. But he received his punishment, for he was tied to the tails of 4 wild horses and torn to pieces. Prince Sluggobill married the princess. It was a magnificent wedding. I myself was there and drank of the mead and wine, but they only touched my beard. They did not enter my mouth. The spirit of the steppes. In ancient days there lived a king and queen. The former was old, but the latter young. Although they loved one another dearly, they were very unhappy, for God had not given them any children. They fretted and grieved about this so deeply that the queen became ill with melancholy. The doctors advised her to travel. The king was obliged to remain at home, so she went without him, accompanied by 12 maids of honor, all beautiful and fresh as flowers in May. When they had travelled for some days, they reached a vast uninhabited plain which stretched so far away it seemed to touch the sky. After driving hither and thither for some time, the driver was quite bewildered and stopped before a large stone column. At its foot stood a warrior on horseback, clad in steel armor. "Brave knight, can you direct me to the high road?" said the driver. "We are lost and know not which way to go." "I will show you the way," said the warrior, "but only on one condition, that each of you gives me a kiss." The queen looked at the warrior in wrath and ordered the coachman to drive on. The carriage continued moving nearly all day, but as if bewitched, for it always returned to the stone column. This time the queen addressed the warrior. "Knight," said she, "show us the road, and I will reward you richly." "I am the master spirit of the steppes," answered he. "I demand payment for showing the way, and my payment is always in kisses." "Very well. My 12 maids of honor shall pay you. 13 kisses are due to me. The first must be given by the lady who addresses me." The queen was very angry, and again the attempt was made to find their way. But the carriage, though during the whole time it moved in an opposite direction, still returned to the stone column. It was now dark, and they were obliged to think of finding shelter for the night. So the queen was obliged to give the warrior his strange payment. Getting out of her carriage, she walked up to the knight, and looking modestly down, allowed him to kiss her. Her 12 maids of honor who followed did the same. A moment later, stone column and horsemen had vanished, and they found themselves on the high road, while a perfumed cloud seemed to float over the steppes. The queen stepped into her carriage with her ladies, and so the journey was continued. But from that day the beautiful queen and her maids became thoughtful and sad, and, losing all pleasure in travel, went back to the capital. Yet the return home did not make the queen happy, for always before her eyes she saw the horsemen of the steppes. This displeased the king, who became gloomy and ill-tempered. One day, while the king was on his throne in the council chamber, he suddenly heard the sweetest warblings. Like unto those produced by a bird of paradise, these were answered by the songs of many nightingales. Wondering, he sent to find out what it was. The messenger returned, saying that the queen and her 12 maids of honor had each been presented with a girl baby, and that the sweet warblings were but the crying of the children. The king was greatly astonished, and while he was engaged in deep thought about the matter, the palace was suddenly lit up by lights of dazzling brightness. On inquiring into the cause, he learnt that the little princess had opened her eyes, and that they shone with matchless brilliancy. At first the king could not speak, so amazed was he. He laughed and he cried, he sorrowed and he rejoiced, and in the midst of it all a deputation of ministers and senators was announced. When these were shown into his presence, they fell on their knees, and striking the ground with their foreheads said, "Sire, save your people and your royal person. The queen and her 12 maids of honor have been presented by the spirit of the steppes with 13 girl babies. We beseech you to have these children killed, or we shall all be destroyed." The king, roused to anger, gave orders that all the babies should be thrown into the sea. The courtiers were already on their way to obey this cruel command when the queen entered, weeping and pale as death. She threw herself at the king's feet and begged him to spare the lives of these helpless and innocent children, and instead to let them be placed on a desert island and there left in the hands of God. The king granted her wish. The baby princess was placed in a golden cradle, her little companions in copper cradles, and the 13 were taken to a desert island and left quite alone. Everyone at court thought that they had perished, and said one to another, "They will die from cold and hunger. They will be devoured by wild beasts or birds of prey. They are sure to die, perchance they will be buried under dead leaves or covered with snow." But happily, nothing of the kind happened, for God takes care of little children. The small princess grew bigger, day by day. Every morning she was awakened by the rising sun and bathed by the dew. Soft breezes refreshed her, and twisted into plaits her luxuriant hair. The trees sang her to sleep with their rustling lullabies, the stars watched over her at night. The swans clothed her in their soft raiment, and the bees fed her with their honey. The beauty of the little maiden increased with her growth. Her brow was calm and pure as the moon, her lips red as a rosebud, and so eloquent that her voice sounded like a shower of pearls. But wonderful beyond compare was the expressive beauty of her eyes, for if she looked at you kindly, you seemed to float in a sea of joy. If angrily, it made you numb with fear, and you were instantly changed into a block of ice. She was waited upon by her 12 companions, who were almost as charming as their mistress, to whom they were devotedly attached. Rumors of the loveliness of Princess Sudalisu spread far and wide. People came to see her from all parts of the world, so that it was soon no longer a desert island, but a thickly populated and magnificent city. Many a prince came from afar and entered the lists as suitor for the hand of Sudalisu, but none succeeded in winning her love. Those who bore with good temper and resignation the disappointment of being refused returned home safe and sound. But woe to the unlucky wretch who rebelled against her will and attempted to use an armed force. His soldiers perished miserably, while he, frozen to the heart by her angry glance, was turned into a block of ice. Now it happened that the famous ogre, Kosti, who lived underground, was a great admirer of beauty, and he took it into his head to see what the creatures above ground were doing. By the help of his telescope, he was able to observe all the kings and queens, princes and princesses, gentlemen and ladies living on the earth. As he was looking, his eye fell upon a beautiful island where, bright as many stars, stood 12 maidens, while in their midst, upon a couch of swan's down, slept a young princess lovely as the dawn of day. Sudalisu was dreaming of a young knight who rode a spirited horse. On his breast was a golden cuirass, and in his hand an invisible club. And in her dream she admired this knight, and loved him more than life itself. The wicked Kosti longed to have her for his own, and determined to carry her off. He reached the earth by striking it from underground 3 times with his forehead. The princess called her army together, and putting herself at its head, led her soldiers against him. But he merely breathed upon the soldiers, and they fell down in an overpowering sleep. Then he stretched out his bony hands to take the princess, but she, throwing a glance full of anger and disdain at him, changed him into a block of ice. Then she shut herself up in her palace. Kosti did not remain frozen long. When the princess had departed, he came to life again and started off in pursuit of her. On reaching the town where she dwelt, he put all the inhabitants into a charmed sleep, and laid the same spell upon the 12 maids of honor. Fearing the power of her eyes, he dared not attack Sudolisu herself, so he surrounded her palace with an iron wall, and left it in charge of a monster dragon with 12 heads. Then he waited, in hope that the princess would give in. Days passed, weeks grew into months, and still Princess Sudolisu's kingdom looked like one large bedchamber. The people snored in the streets. The brave army lying in the field slept soundly, hidden in the long grass under the shadow of nettle, wormwood and thistle, rust and dust marring the brightness of their armor. Inside the palace everything was the same. The 12 maids of honor lay motionless. The princess alone kept watch, silent amid this rain of sleep. She walked up and down her narrow prison, sighing and weeping bitter tears. But no other sound broke the silence. Only Kosti, avoiding her glance, still called through the doors and begged her to refuse him no longer. Then he promised she should be queen of the netherworld, but she answered him not. Lonely and miserable, she thought of the prince of her dreams. She saw him in his golden armor, mounted on his spirited steed, looking at her with eyes full of love. So she imagined him day and night, looking out a window one day, and seeing a cloud floating on the horizon, she cried, "Floating cloudlet, soft and white, pilgrim of the sky, I pray you for one moment. Light on me your pitying eye. Where my love is, can you tell? Thinks he of me ill or well?" "I know not," answered the cloud. "Ask the wind." Then she saw a tiny breeze playing among the field flowers and called out, "Gentle breezelet, soul of air, look not lightly on my pain. Kindly lift me from despair. Help me freedom to regain. Where my love is, can you tell? Thinks he of me ill or well?" "Ask that little star yonder," answered the breeze. "She knows more than I." Sudolisu raised her beautiful eyes to the twinkling stars and said, "Shining star, God's light on high, look down and prithee see. Behold me weep and hear me sigh. Then help and pity me. Where my love is, canst thou tell? Thinks he of me ill or well?" "You will learn more from the moon," answered the star. "She lives nearer the earth than I, and sees everything that goes on there." The moon was just rising from her silver bed when Sudolisu called to her, "Pearl of the sky! Thou radiant moon, thy watch o'er the stars pray leave. Throw thy soft glance o'er the earth ere I swoon. O'ercome by my sorrows, I weep and I grieve. I pine for my friend, O ease thou my heart, and say, am I loved? In his thoughts have I part?" "Princess," replied the moon, "I know nothing of your friend. But wait a few hours, the sun will have then risen. He knows everything, and will surely be able to tell you." So the princess kept her eyes fixed upon that part of the sky where the sun first appears, chasing away the darkness like a flock of birds. When he came forth in all his glory, she said, "Soul of the world, thou deep fountain of life, eye of all-powerful God, visit my prison, dark scene of sad strife. Raise up my soul from the sod, with hope that my friend whom I pine for and love may come to my rescue. Say, where does he rove?" "Sweet Sudolisu," answered the sun, "dry the tears that like pearls roll down your sad and lovely face. Let your troubled heart be at peace, for your friend The prince is now on his way to rescue you. He has recovered the magic ring from the netherworld, and many armies from those countries have assembled to follow him. He is now moving towards Kosti's palace and intends to punish him. But all this will be of no avail, and Kosti will gain the victory if the prince does not make use of other means which I am now on my way to provide him with. Farewell. Be brave. He whom you love will come to your aid and save you from Kosti and his sorceries. Happiness is in store for you both." The sun then rose upon a distant land, where Prince Junak, mounted on a powerful steed and clad in golden armor, assembled his forces to fight against the giant Kosti. Thrice he had dreamt of the beautiful princess shut up in the sleeping palace, for the fame of her loveliness had reached him, and he loved without having seen. "Leave your army where it is," said the sun. "It will not be of the slightest use in fighting against Kosti. He is proof against all weapons. The only way to rescue the princess is to kill him, and there is but one who can tell you how to do it, and that is the witch, old Yaga. I will show you how to find the horse that will carry you straight to her. First, take the road to the east, and walk on till you come to a wide plain. There, right in the middle of the plain, are 3 oaks, and in the center of these, lying close to the ground, is an iron door with a copper handle. Behind the door is the horse, also an invisible club. Both are necessary for the work you have to do. You will learn the rest afterwards. Farewell." This advice astonished the prince greatly. He hardly knew what to do. After deep reflection he crossed himself, took the magic ring from his finger, and cast it into the sea. Instantly the army vanished like mist before the wind, and when not a trace of it was left, he took the road to the east. After walking straight on for 8 days, he reached a large green plain, in the middle of which grew the 3 oaks, and in the center of these, close to the ground, was the iron door with the copper handle. Opening the door, he found a winding staircase which led to a second door bound with iron and shut by means of a huge padlock 60 pounds in weight. At this moment he heard the neighing of a horse, the sound being followed by the opening of 11 other iron doors. There he saw the war horse, which centuries ago had been bewitched by a magician. The prince whistled. The horse immediately bounded towards him, at the same time breaking the 12 iron chains that fastened him to the manger. He was a beautiful creature, strong, light, handsome, full of fire and grace. His eyes flashed lightnings. From his nostrils came flames of fire. His mane was like a cloud of gold. He was certainly a marvel of a horse. "Prince Junak," said the steed, "I have waited centuries for such a knight as you. Here I am, ready to carry you and serve you faithfully. Mount upon my back, and take hold of the invisible club that hangs at the pommel of the saddle. You yourself will not need to use it. Give it your orders. It will carry them out and do the fighting itself. Now we will start. May God look after us. Tell me where you wish to go, and you shall be there directly." The prince quickly told the horse his history, mounted, seized the club, and set off. The creature capered, galloped, flew, and swam in the air higher than the highest forests, but lower than the clouds. He crossed mountains, rivers, and precipices. He barely touched the blades of grass in passing over them, and went so lightly along the roads that he did not raise 1 grain of dust. Towards sunset, Junak found himself close to an immense forest, in the center of which stood Yaga's house. All around were oaks and pines hundreds of years old, untouched by the axe of man. These enormous trees, lit up by the rays of the setting sun, seemed to look with astonishment at their strange guest. The silence was absolute. Not a bird sang in the branches. Not an insect hummed in the air, not a worm crawled upon the ground. The only sound was that made by the horse as he broke through the underwood. Then they came in sight of a small house supported by a cock's foot, round which it turned as on a movable pivot. Prince Junak cried, "Turn round, little house, turn round! I want to come inside. Let thy back to the forest be found, thy door to me open wide." The little house turned round, and the prince entering saw old Yaga, who immediately cried out, "What, Prince Junak? How have you come here, where no one ever enters?" "You are a silly old witch, to worry me with questions instead of making me welcome," said the prince. At these words, old Yaga jumped up and hastened to attend to his needs. She prepared food and drink, made him a soft bed where he could sleep comfortably, and then, leaving the house, passed the night out of doors. On her return in the morning, the prince related all his adventures and confided his plans. "Prince Junak," said she, "you have undertaken a very difficult task, but your courage will enable you to accomplish it successfully. I will tell you how to kill Kosti, for without that you can do nothing. Now, in the very midst of the ocean lies the island of eternal life. Upon this island is an oak tree, and at the foot of it, hidden in the earth, a coffer bound with iron. A hare is shut up in this coffer, and under her sits a grey duck whose body contains an egg. Within this egg is Kosti's life. If it be broken, he dies. Goodbye, Prince Junak. Start without loss of time. Your horse will carry you to the island." Junak mounted his horse, spoke a few words to him, and the brave creature fled through space with the swiftness of an arrow. Leaving the forest and its enormous trees behind, they soon reached the shores of the ocean. Fishermen's nets lay on the beach, and in one of them was a large sea fish who, struggling to free itself, spoke to the prince in a human voice. "Prince Junak," he said sadly, "free me from my prison. I assure you, you will lose nothing by doing me this service." Junak did what was required of him, and threw the fish back into the water. It plunged and disappeared, but he paid little attention to it. So occupied was he with his own thoughts. In the far distance could be seen the rocks of the island of eternal life, but there seemed no way of reaching it. Leaning on his club, he thought, and ever as he thought, he grew sadder and sadder. "What is the matter, Prince Junak? Has anything vexed you?" asked his horse. "How can I help grieving when, while in sight of the island, I can go no further? How can we cross the sea?" "Get on my back, Prince. I will be your bridge. Only take care to hold on tight." The prince held firmly to its mane, and the horse leapt into the sea. At first they were plunged right beneath the waves, but rising again to the surface, swam easily across. The sun was about to set when the prince dismounted on the island of eternal life. He first took off his horse's harness, and leaving him to browse on the green grass, hurried to the top of a distant hill, whence he could see a large oak. Without losing a moment, he hastened towards it, seized the tree with both hands, pulled at it with all his might, and after the most violent efforts, tore it up by the roots from the place it had filled for centuries. The tree groaned and fell, and the hole in which it had been planted appeared like an immense case. Right at the bottom of this case was a coffer bound with iron. The prince took it up, broke the lock by striking it with a stone, opened it, and seized the hare that was trying to make its escape. The grey duck that had lain underneath flew off towards the sea. The prince fired, struck the bird, the latter dropped its egg into the sea, and both were swallowed by the waves. Junak gave a cry of despair and rushed to the beach. At first he could see nothing. After a few minutes there was a slight movement of the waves, while upon the surface swam the fish whose life he had saved. It came towards him, right on to the sand, and dropping the lost egg at his feet, said, "You see, Prince, I have not forgotten your kindness. and now I have found it in my power to be of service to you." Having thus spoken, it disappeared in the water. The prince took the egg, mounted his horse, and crossing the sea with his heart full of hope, journeyed towards the island where Princess Sudolisu kept watch over her sleeping subjects in the enchanted palace. The latter was surrounded by a wall and guarded by the dragon with 12 heads. Now these heads went to sleep in turn, 6 at a time. So it was impossible to take him unawares or to kill him, for that could be done only by his own blows. On reaching the palace gates, Junak sent his invisible club forward to clear the way, whereupon it threw itself upon the dragon and began to beat all the heads unmercifully. The blows came so thick and fast that the body was soon crushed to pieces. Still the dragon lived and beat the air with its claws. Then it opened its 12 jaws, from which darted pointed tongues, but it could not lay hold of the invisible club. At last, tormented on all sides and filled with rage, it buried its sharp claws in its own body and died. The prince then entered the palace gates, and having put his faithful horse in the stables and armed himself with his invisible club, made his way for the tower in which the princess was shut up. On seeing him, she cried out, "Prince, I rejoice to see your victory over the dragon. There is yet a more terrible foe to conquer, and he is my jailer, the cruel Koste. Beware of him, for if he should kill you, I shall throw myself out of window into the precipice beneath. Be comforted, my princess, for in this egg I hold the life or death of Koste." Then turning to the invisible club, he said, "Press forward, my invisible club, strike your best, and rid the earth of this wicked giant." The club began by breaking down the iron doors, and thus reached Koste. The giant was soon so crippled with blows that his teeth were smashed, lightnings flashed from his eyes, and he rolled round and round like a pincushion. Had he been a man, he must have died under such treatment. But he was no man, this master of sorcery. So he managed to get on his feet and look for his tormentor. The blows from the club rained hard upon him all the time, and with such effect that his groans could be heard all over the island. On approaching the window, he saw Prince Junak. "Ah, wretch!" cried the ogre. "It is you, is it? Who torments me in this way?" And he prepared to blow upon him with his poisonous breath. But the prince instantly crushed the egg between his hands. The shell broke. The white and yellow mingled and flowed to the ground, and Koste died. As the sorcerer breathed his last, the enchantments vanished, and the sleeping islanders awoke. The army, once more afoot, advanced with beating drums to the palace, and everything fell into its accustomed place. As soon as Princess Sudolisu was freed from her prison, she held out her white hand to her deliverer, and thanking him in the most touching words, led him to the throne and placed him at her side. The 12 maids of honor, having chosen young and brave warriors, ranged themselves with their lovers round the queen. Then the doors were thrown open, and the priests in their robes entered, bearing a golden tray of wedding rings. Thereupon the marriage ceremony was gone through, and the lovers united in God's name. After the wedding there were feasting and music and dancing, as is usual on such occasions, and they all enjoyed themselves. It makes one glad to think how happy they were, and what a glorious time they had after their misfortunes. The prince with the golden hand. There once lived a king and queen who had an only daughter, and the beauty of this princess surpassed everything seen or heard of. Her forehead was brilliant as the moon, her lips like the rose, her complexion had the delicacy of the lily, and her breath the sweetness of jessamine. Her hair was golden, and in her voice and glance there was something so enchanting that none could help listening to her or looking at her. The princess lived for 17 years in her own rooms, rejoicing the heart of her parents, teachers, and servants. No one else ever saw her, for the sons of the king and all other princes were forbidden to enter her rooms. She never went anywhere, never looked upon the outside world, and never breathed the outer air, but she was perfectly happy. When she was 18, it happened, either by chance or by the will of fate, that she heard the cry of the cuckoo. This sound made her strangely uneasy. Her golden head drooped, and covering her eyes with her hands, she fell into thought so deep as not to hear her mother enter. The queen looked at her anxiously, and after comforting her, went to tell the king about it. For many years past, the sons of kings and neighboring princes had, either personally or by their ambassadors, presented themselves at court to ask the king for the hand of his daughter in marriage, but he had always bidden them wait until another time. Now, after a long consultation with the queen, he sent messengers to foreign courts and elsewhere to proclaim that the princess, in accordance with the wishes of her parents, was about to choose a husband, and that the man of her choice would also have the right of succession to the throne. When the princess heard of this decision, her joy was very great, and for days she would dream about it. Then she looked out into the garden through the golden lattice of her window, and longed with an irresistible longing to walk in the open air upon the smooth lawn. With great difficulty she at last persuaded her governesses to allow her to do so, they agreeing on condition that she should keep with them. So the crystal doors were thrown open, the oaken gates that shut in the orchard turned on their hinges, and the princess found herself on the green grass. She ran about, picking the sweet-scented flowers and chasing the many-coloured butterflies. But she could not have been a very prudent maiden, for she wandered away from her governesses with her face uncovered. Just at that moment, a raging hurricane, such as had never been seen or heard before, passed by and fell upon the garden. It roared and whistled round and round, then, seizing the princess, carried her far away. The terrified governesses wrung their hands, and were for a time speechless with grief. At last they rushed into the palace, and throwing themselves on their knees before the king and queen, told them with sobs and tears what had happened. They were overwhelmed with sorrow and knew not what to do. By this time quite a crowd of princes had arrived at the palace, and seeing the king in such bitter grief, inquired the reason of it. "Sorrow has touched my white hairs," said the king. "The hurricane has carried off my dearly beloved child, the sweet princess with the golden hair, and I know not where it has taken her. Whoever finds this out and brings her back to me shall have her for his wife, and with her half my kingdom for a wedding present, and the remainder of my wealth and titles after my death." After hearing these words, princes and knights mounted their horses and set off to search throughout the world for the beautiful princess with the golden hair who had been carried away by Vicar. Now, among the seekers were two brothers, sons of a king, and they travelled together through many countries, asking for news of the princess. But no one knew anything about her. But they continued their search, and at the end of 2 years arrived in a country that lies in the centre of the earth, and has summer and winter at the same time. The princes determined to find out whether this was the place where the hurricane had hidden the princess with the golden hair. So they began to ascend one of the mountains on foot, leaving their horses behind them to feed on the grass. On reaching the top, they came in sight of a silver palace supported on a cock's foot, while at one of the windows the sun's rays shone upon a head of golden hair. Surely it could only belong to the princess. Suddenly the north wind blew so violently, and the cold became so intense, that the leaves of the trees withered and the breath froze. The two princes tried to keep their footing and battled manfully against the storm, but they were overcome by its fierceness and fell together, frozen to death. Their broken-hearted parents waited for them in vain, Masses were said, charities distributed, and prayers sent up to God to pity them in their sorrow. One day, when the queen, the mother of the princes, was giving a poor old man some money, she said to him, "My good old friend, pray God to guard our sons and soon bring them back in good health." "Ah, noble lady," answered he, "that prayer would be useless. Everlasting rest is all one may ask for the dead, but in return for the love you have shown, and the money you have given the poor and needy. I am charged with this message that God has taken pity on your sorrow, and that ere long you will be the mother of a son, the like of whom has never yet been seen." The old man, having spoken thus, vanished. The queen, whose tears were falling, felt a strange joy enter her heart, and a feeling of happiness steal over her as she went to the king and repeated the old man's words. And so it came to pass. For a week or two later, God sent her a son, and he was in no way like an ordinary child. His eyes resembled those of a falcon, and his eyebrows the sable's fur. His right hand was of pure gold, and his manner and appearance were so full of an indescribable majesty that he was looked upon by everyone with a feeling of awe. His growth, too, was not like that of other children. When but 3 days old, he stepped out of his swaddling clothes and left his cradle. And he was so strong that when his parents entered the room, he ran towards them, crying out, "Good morning!" "Dear parents, why are you so sad? Are you not happy at the sight of me?" "We are indeed happy, dear child, and we thank God for having sent us you in our great grief. But we cannot forget your 2 brothers. They were so handsome and brave and worthy of a great destiny. And our sadness is increased when we remember that instead of resting in their own country in the tomb of their forefathers, they sleep in an unknown land, perhaps without burial. Alas, it is 3 years since we had news of them." At these words the child's tears fell, and he embraced his parents and said, "Weep no more, dear parents. You shall soon be comforted. For before next spring I shall be a strong young man, and will look for my brothers all over the world, and I will bring them back to you, if not alive, yet dead, aye, though I have to seek them in the very centre of the earth." At these words, and at that which followed, the king and queen were amazed, for the strange child, guided as it were by an invisible hand, rushed into the garden, and in spite of the cold, for it was not yet daylight, bathed in the early dew. When the sun had risen, he threw himself down near a little wood on the fine sand, rubbed and rolled himself in it, and returned home, no longer a child, but a youth. It was pleasant to the king to see his son thrive in this way, and indeed the young prince was the handsomest in the whole land. He grew from hour to hour. At the end of a month he could wield a sword. In 2 months he rode on horseback. In 3 months he had grown a beautiful moustache of pure gold. Then he put on a helmet, and presenting himself before the king and queen, said, "My much-honoured parents, your son asks your blessing. I am no longer a child, and now go to seek my brothers. In order to find them, I will, if necessary, go to the furthest ends of the world. Ah, do not venture. Stay rather with us, dear son. You are still too young to be exposed to the risks of such an undertaking." "Adventures have no terrors for me," replied the young hero. "I trust in God. Why should I for a moment hesitate to face these dangers? Whatever destiny has in store for us will happen, whatever we may do to try to prevent it." So they agreed to let him go. Weeping, they bade him farewell, blessing him and the road he was to travel. A pleasant tale is soon told, but events do not pass so quickly. The young prince crossed deep rivers and climbed high mountains till he came to a dark forest. In the distance he saw a cottage supported on a cock's foot, and standing in the midst of a field full of poppies. As he made his ways towards it, he was suddenly seized by an overpowering longing to sleep. But he urged on his horse, and breaking off the poppy heads as he galloped through the field, came up close to the house. Then he called out, "Little cot, turn around on thy foot, turn thou free. To the forest set thy back, let thy door be wide to me." The cottage turned round with a great creaking noise, the door facing the prince. He entered, and found an old woman with thin white hair and a face covered with wrinkles, truly frightful to look upon. She was sitting at a table, her head resting on her hands, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, lost in deep thought. Near her were two beautiful girls, their complexions like lilies and roses, and in every way sweet to the eye. "Ah, how do you do, prince, with moustache of gold, hero with the golden fist?" said old Yaga. "What has brought you here?" Having told her the object of his journey, she replied, "Your elder brothers perished on the mountain that touches the clouds, while in search of the princess with the golden hair, who was carried off by Vika, the hurricane." "And how is this thief Vika to be got at?" asked the prince. "Ah, my dear child, he would swallow you like a fly. It is now 100 years since I went outside this cottage, for fear Vika should seize me and carry me off to his palace near the sky. I am not afraid of his carrying me off. I am not handsome enough for that. And he will not swallow me either, for my golden hand can smash anything. Then if you are not afraid, my dove, I will help you to the best of my power. But give me your word of honor that you will bring me some of the water of youth, for it restores even to the most aged the beauty and freshness of youth. I give you my word of honor that I will bring you some. This, then, is what you must do. I will give you a pincushion for a guide. This you throw in front of you, and follow whithersoever it goes. It will lead you to the mountain that touches the clouds, and which is guarded in Vika's absence by his father and mother, the northern blast and the south wind. On no account lose sight of the pincushion. If attacked by the father, the northern blast, and suddenly seized with cold, then put on this heat-giving hood. If overpowered by burning heat of the south wind, then drink from this cooling flagon. Thus, by means of the pincushion, the hood, and the flagon, you will reach the top of the mountain where the princess with the golden hair is imprisoned. Deal with Vika as you will. Only remember to bring me some of the water of youth." Our young hero took the heat-giving hood, the cooling flagon, and the pincushion, and, after bidding farewell to old Yaga and her two pretty daughters, mounted his steed and rode off, following the pincushion, which rolled before him at a great rate. Now, a beautiful story is soon told, but the events of which it consists do not in real life take place so rapidly. When the prince had travelled through 2 kingdoms, he came to a land in which lay a very beautiful valley that stretched into the far distance, and above it towered the mountain that touches the sky. The summit was so high above the earth, you might almost fancy it reached the moon. The prince dismounted, left his horse to graze, and having crossed himself, began to follow the pincushion up steep and rocky paths. When he had got halfway there, the north wind began to blow, and the cold was so intense that the wood of the trees split up and the breath froze. He felt chilled to the heart, but he quickly put on the heat-giving hood and cried, "O heat-giving hood, see I fly now to thee. Lend me quickly thine aid. O hasten to warm ere the cold has killed me. With thee I'm not afraid." The northern blast blew with redoubled fury, but to no purpose, for the prince was so hot that he streamed with perspiration, and indeed was obliged to unbutton his coat and fan himself. Here the pincushion stopped upon a small snow-covered mound. the prince cleared away the snow, beneath which lay the frozen bodies of two young men, and he knew them to be those of his lost brothers. Having knelt beside them and prayed, he turned to follow the pincushion, which had already started, and was rolling ever higher and higher. On reaching the top of the mountain, he saw a silver palace supported on a cock's foot, and at one of the windows, shining in the sun's rays, a head of golden hair which could belong to no one but the princess. Suddenly, a hot wind began to blow from the south, and the heat became so intense that leaves withered and dropped from the trees, the grass dried up, and large cracks appeared in several places of the earth's surface. Thirst, heat, and weariness began to tell upon the young prince, so he took the cooling flagon from his pocket and cried, "Flagon, bring me quick relief. From this parching heat, in thy draught I have belief, coolness it will meet." After drinking deeply, he felt stronger than ever, and so continued to ascend. Not only was he relieved from the great heat, but was even obliged to button up his coat to keep himself warm. The pincushion still led the way, ever climbing higher and higher, while the prince followed close behind. After crossing the region of clouds, they came to the topmost peak of the mountain. Here, the prince came close to the palace, which can only be likened to a dream of perfect beauty. It was supported on a cock's foot and was built entirely of silver, except for its steel gates and roof of solid gold. Before the entrance was a deep precipice over which none but the birds could pass. As the prince gazed upon the splendid building, the princess leaned out of one of the windows, and seeing him light shone from her sparkling eyes. Her lovely hair floated in the wind, and the scent of her sweet breath filled the air. The prince sprang forward and cried out, "Silver palace, O turn! On thy foot turn thou free, to the steep rocks thy back, but thy doors wide to me." At these words it revolved creaking, the doorway facing the prince. As he entered, it returned to its original position. The prince went through the palace till he came to a room bright as the sun itself, and the walls, floor, and ceiling of which consisted of mirrors. He was filled with wonder, for instead of one princess, he saw 12, all equally beautiful, with the same graceful movements and golden hair. But 11 were only reflections of the one real princess. She gave a cry of joy on seeing him, and running to meet him said, "Ah, noble sir, you look like a delivering angel. Surely you bring me good news. From what family, city, or country have you come? Perhaps my dear father and mother sent you in search of me?" "No one has sent me. I have come of my own free will, to rescue you and restore you to your parents." When he had told her all that had passed, she said, "Your devotion, prince, is very great. May God bless your attempt. But Vika, the hurricane, is unconquerable, so, if life be dear to you, fly. Leave this place before his return, which I expect every minute. He will kill you with one glance of his eyes. If I should not succeed in saving you, sweet princess, life can be no longer dear to me. But I am full of hope, and I beg you first to give me some of the strength-giving water from the heroic well, for this is drunk by the hurricane." The princess drew a bucketful of water, which the young man emptied at one draught and then asked for another. This astonished her somewhat, but she gave it him, and when he had drunk it he said, "Allow me, princess, to sit down for a moment to take breath." But directly he sat down, it broke into 1,000 pieces. She then brought him the chair used by Vika himself, but although it was made of the strongest steel, it bent and creaked beneath the prince's weight. "Now you see," said he, "that I have grown heavier than your unconquerable hurricane, so take courage. With God's help and your good wishes, I shall overcome him. In the meantime, tell me how you pass your time here." "Alas, in bitter tears and sad reflections, my only consolation is that I have been able to keep my persecutor at a distance, for he vainly implores me to marry him. 2 years have now passed away, and yet none of his efforts to win my consent have been successful. Last time he went away, he told me that if on his return he had not guessed the riddles I set him, the correct explanation of these being the condition I have made for his marrying me, he would set them aside and marry me in spite of my objections. Ah, then I am just in time. I will be the priest on that occasion and give him death for a bride." At that moment a horrible whistling was heard. "Be on your guard, prince," cried she. "Here comes the hurricane." The palace spun rapidly round. Fearful sounds filled the building. Thousands of ravens and birds of ill omen croaked loudly and flapped their wings, and all the doors opened with a tremendous noise. Viker, mounted on his winged horse that breathed fire, leapt into the mirrored room, then stopped amazed at the sight before him. He was indeed the hurricane, with the body of a giant and the head of a dragon. And as he gazed, his horse pranced and beat his wings. "What is your business here, stranger?" he shouted, and the sound of his voice was like unto a lion's roar. "I am your enemy, and I want your blood," replied the prince calmly. "Your boldness amuses me. At the same time, if you do not depart at once, I will take you in my left hand and crush every bone in your body with my right." "Try, if you dare, woman stealer," he answered. Viker roared, breathing fire in his rage, and with his mouth wide open threw himself upon the prince, intending to swallow him. But the latter stepped lightly aside, and putting his golden hand down his enemy's throat, seized him by the tongue and dashed him against the wall with such force that the monster bounded against it like a boar, and died within a few moments, shedding torrents of blood. The prince then drew from different springs the water that restores, that revives, and that makes young, and taking the unconscious girl in his arms, he led the winged horse to the door and said, "Silver Palace, O turn on thy foot, turn thou free. To the steep rocks thy back, the courtyard may I see." Whereupon the palace creaked round on the cock's foot, and the door opened on the courtyard. Mounting the horse, he placed the princess before him, for she had by this time recovered from her swoon, and cried, "Fiery horse with strength of wing, I am now your lord. Do my will in everything. Be your law my word. Where I point there you must go, at once, the way you know." And he pointed to the place where his brothers lay, frozen in death. The horse rose, pranced, beat the air with his wings, then, lifting himself high in the air, came down gently where the two princes were lying. The prince with the golden hand sprinkled their bodies with the life-restoring water, and instantly the pallor of death disappeared, leaving in its place the natural color. He then sprinkled them with the water that revives, after which they opened their eyes, got up, and looking round said, "How well we have slept! But what has happened? And how is it we see the lovely princess we sought in the society of a young man, a perfect stranger to us?" The prince with the golden hand explained everything, embraced his brothers tenderly, and taking them with him on his horse, showed the Zata that he wished to go in the direction of Yaga's cottage. The horse rose up, pranced, lifted himself in the air, then, beating his wings far above the highest forests, descended close by the cottage. The prince said, "Little cot, turn around on thy foot, turn thou free, to the forest thy back, but thy door wide to me." The cottage began to creak without delay, and turned round with the floor facing the travellers. Old Yaga was on the lookout, and came to meet them. As soon as she got the water of youth, she sprinkled herself with it, and instantly everything about her that was old and ugly became young and charming. So pleased was she to be young again that she kissed the prince's hands and said, "Ask of me anything you like. I will refuse you nothing." At that moment, her two beautiful young daughters happened to look out of the window, upon which the two elder princes, who were admiring them, said, "Will you give us your daughters for wives?" "That I will with pleasure," said she, and beckoned them to her. Then, curtsying to her future sons-in-law, she laughed merrily and vanished. They placed their brides before them on the same horse, while the prince with the golden hand, pointing to where he wished to go, said, "Fiery horse with strength of wing, I am now your lord. Do my will in everything. Be your law my word. Where I point, there you must go. At once, the way you know." The horse rose up, pranced, flapped his wings, and flew far above the forest. An hour or two later, he descended before the palace of the golden-haired princess's parents. When the king and queen saw their only daughter, who had so long been lost to them, they ran to meet her with exclamations of joy and kissed her gratefully and lovingly, at the same time thanking the prince who had restored her to them. And when they heard the story of his adventures, they said, "You, prince with the golden hand, shall receive our beloved daughter in marriage with the half of our kingdom and the right of succession to the remainder after us. Let us, too, add to the joy of this day by celebrating the weddings of your two brothers." The princess with the golden hair kissed her father lovingly and said, "My much honored and noble sire and lord, the prince, my bridegroom knows of the vow I made when carried off by the hurricane, that I would only give my hand to him who could answer aright my 6 enigmas. It would be impossible for the princess with the golden hair to break her word." The king was silent, but the prince said, "Speak, sweet princess, I am listening." "This is my first riddle. 2 of my extremities form a sharp point, the 2 others a ring. In my center is a screw." "A pair of scissors," answered he. "Well guessed. This is the second. I make the round of the table on only 1 foot, but if I am wounded, the evil is beyond repair." "A glass of wine." "Right. This is the third. I have no tongue, and yet I answer faithfully. I am not seen, yet everyone hears me." "An echo." "True. This is the fourth. Fire cannot light me, brush cannot sweep me, no painter can paint me, no hiding place secure me." "Sunshine." "The very thing. This is the 5th. I existed before the creation of Adam. I am always changing in succession the 2 colors of my dress. Thousands of years have gone by, but I have remained unaltered both in color and form. It must be time, including day and night." "You have succeeded in guessing the 5 most difficult. The last is the easiest of all. By day a ring, by night a serpent. He who guesses this shall be my bridegroom." "It is a girdle." "Now they are all guessed," said she, and gave her hand to the young prince. They knelt before the king and queen to receive their blessing. The 3 weddings were celebrated that same evening, and a messenger mounted the winged horse to carry the good news to the parents of the young princes and to bring them back as guests. Meanwhile, a magnificent feast was prepared, and invitations were sent to all their friends and acquaintances. And from that evening until the next morning, they ceased not to feast and drink and dance. I too was a guest, and feasted with the rest. But though I ate and drank, the wine only ran down my beard, and my throat remained dry.